This is a fundamental asymmetry that exists in this left-right dynamic that I despise. Like, Charlie Kirk wasn't bad because he was just saying that, like, his economic worldview was about, like, more deregulation and more tax breaks for the wealthy. The bad aspect of it was he would just consistently churn out propaganda that dehumanized marginalized populations, prosecuting inalienable characteristics of people. It's very different than just like dunking of evangelical over their understanding of abortion. Anyway, there is one last thing that I do want to talk about with respect to Israel. Obviously, it's the Ta-Nehisi Coates interview with Ezra Klein. That was a huge one.
There are two things that are true.
And this is going to be mind-melting and mind-bending. It's not just Israel, of course. They're obviously going to talk about their Charlie Kirk disagreement as well. This is that's at least like the main centerpiece of this conversation. It's basically liberalism meeting like the notion that like liberalism is simply a political project that will constantly write off marginalized populations, meeting a singular person who is from a marginalized background, being a Black American, and going, hey, you can't write me off. What do you mean you want to write me off in an effort to win favor because you think that in the aftermath of writing me and others like me off, that we will still have a better future for people like myself? So let's take a look. This is, of course, Ezra Klein, who I used to say jokingly friend of the show, Ezra Klein, with actual friend of the show, Ta-Nehisi Coates, duking it out.
True about what President Donald Trump said at Charlie Kirk's memorial service.
He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie.
One is that it's frightening to see the president of the United States talk this way about his political foes.
I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry.
The other, I think, is that it's an opportunity. I don't think that is a strong politics. And for me, one of the central questions animating the show this year, that has been animating it since the election, is how did we get here? How did we let these people get back into power? What went wrong in our approach to politics that we ended up here? This has been a conversation I've been engaged in since Charlie Kirk's murder. And I wanted to have it with somebody who has maybe not liked the way I've been approaching it. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a writer I admire, somebody I have a genuine friendship with. In the days after Kirk's murder, he published a piece in Vanity Fair, pretty harshly
fucking torched his ass, okay? It was excellent. It was an excellent piece. I personally loved it. I read it on the broadcast. I couldn't believe it. And it was well-deserved, okay? I'll keep it a $1.50. It was well-deserved because Ta-Nehisi is also, like, in some ways, I would say, like, the former Ezra Klein, and he's the Ezra Klein of the Obama admin. Like, the figure that Ezra Klein is, actually, I feel like I'm disrespecting him by saying that, but, like, Ta-Nehisi Coates now is a different person than the former Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, of course, when it comes to identifying white supremacy and Black liberation and Black liberatory struggle, like, he was excellent. He's an excellent writer, but he has been in the past, I think, in the past, he had some ideological weaknesses that he himself recognizes, especially about Israel, which was a major awakening for him. And I think he still has some, liberal tendencies, but at the very least is like his understanding of like the colonial violence that Israel was subjecting the Palestinians to when he saw it with his own two eyes, truly made him understandably reconsider how he had spoken about Israel prior to that moment, with no benefit to his social pedigree, no benefit to his social standing, but only repercussions, as a matter of fact. So I thought that it was great for him to right that wrong In any case, let's take a look at this conversation.
Critical of what I had written. He compared what I was doing there to the whitewashing of the Southern cause after the Civil War. I think it would be the height of hypocrisy for me to say we need to reach across divides and disagreement and then not talk across my own. So I wanted to talk to Ta-Nehisi about the piece, about the aftermath of Kirk's murder, but also about a disagreement, or a question at least, that I think is about more than Kirk. I think there's something very unsettled in the sort of broad coalition of the left around the work of politics, around who we talk to and when and how. When is that work moral? When is it necessary? When is it a betrayal? As always, my email, EzraKleinShow@nytimes.com. Ta-Nehisi Coates, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. I don't know what number time this is.
I think you're one of the, if you go back to the Vox days, I think you're on the leaderboard for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to see you, man.
Good to be here, Ezra. Thank you.
All right, well, let's jump into the disagreement. You wrote a column responding to my column on Charlie Kirk.
Which is so uncomfortable.
It's okay. What was your disagreement with what I wrote after Kirk was assassinated?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank you for having me. I know that I've had to read things about myself that, criticize my work. It's never easy. And people often have a very, very different response than the one you had, which is to invite me here and to talk it out. So I appreciate that. I want to say that up front. I felt that when I initially read the column, and I guess we should be fully transparent here and say there was a discussion between us privately before there was a public thing.
Yeah, we text.
Yeah, we did. We do text regularly, and we did text about this. So I felt like, having not done the research that I eventually did for the college, there was something off about what I knew about this guy. And the presentation of him as, and I don't want to misquote you here, but as basically a paragon of politics and how
Doing politics the right way, Ezra
politics
said.
should be done. So I think I had the same reaction that most ordinary people would have, which is absolute horror at the idea that this guy was somewhere speaking and was killed. But I always think it's important to differentiate how people die versus how they live. And then after doing the research, I had to be honest with you. That's when it got really, really difficult. When I went past my initial impressions and started going through all of the clips of the things he said, the way he talked about people, the way he, described groups in ways that honestly, even as I was writing it, I was uncomfortable saying. And so the idea that this guy should be in any way celebrated for how he conducted politics, the fact that he just slurred across the board, all sorts of groups of people, and then ran an organization wherein, which appeared to me just a haven of hatred. I would not want that to be a model for my politics. And I know, as we talked between us that, you were not attempting to make a statement for the entirety of it. But I guess I feel like at a certain point, somebody's legacy, or somebody does something that is so large, that it's tough to think about their legacy and take that out of it. And that's how I felt about it.
So I think I want to get at the right level of disagreement here. So I think one thing for me is that, I don't know, for me, the immediate hours after somebody is murdered in public, when you see that sort of grief and horror pouring out of the people who loved him, and many people loved him, my instinct then is to just sit with them in their grief, right? To say, I can, for this moment, find some way to grieve with you, to see your friend the way, or in some version of the way you saw him, right? That's not my view of, the person's whole legacy, but going to people when they're grieving like that and saying, listen, I want to tell you really what I thought of your friend. Just feels like not what you do in a kind of a community. I can see people coming down on both sides of that.
I mean, my mind immediately rushes to Hasan Kanafani, right? Would Ezra Klein reflect on his legacy and this is not a moral equivocation between a prominent critic of Israel who never famously took up arms, but was simply a writer and an organizer who was assassinated by the state of Israel. I don't think that someone like Ezra Klein would say that about him. I don't think he would say that about David Duke either. Yeah. Not to say that that's even a better example, because David Duke obviously is a far more overtly reactionary than Charlie Kirk, but I just don't think Ezra Klein would revel in the grief that other people are experiencing.
I actually think that actually is a great impulse, that after somebody's been killed, and not just killed, but because we live in the media environment that we live in, that it's seen and that it will live forever, and that person's family, you know what I mean?
That is being looped in front of all of us.
Jesus Christ.
Which I think has a lot to do with how this was taken.
No, it's terrible. It's terrible. And to have to go, like, to have young kids who have to grow up knowing that is a thing that exists in the world. You know what I mean?
And I'll go one step further on this. One thing I wrote about in that piece that I do worry about is I worry we are already in a cycle of political violence, of mimetic violence. I think about Pelosi, I think about Shapiro, I think about the near assassination on Trump. I think about when after that happened, I thought about me, I thought about you, I thought about all kinds of people I know, right? So I do think there's just something about when violence takes hold that like, that there's something about it that it begins to breach all lines.
Yeah. So
anyway,
I guess
that was part of my reaction too.
I think all of that is understandable, but I guess, was silence not an option?
Yeah, silence to me was not grieving with people. I felt it was important as someone who is liberal, as someone who's a voice, that there are moments.
I don't think you have to be silent in that moment. It's a profoundly important incident that took place. It's a political violence, a political assassination that took place of a prominent advisor to Donald Trump. You don't have to be silent. I think the problem is that it was actually what Ezra Klein chose to omit from the piece that was the issue, and how he chose to present a truly whitewashed reputation laundering initiative of Charlie Kirk that was the issue. That was the real issue, because, hagiography, exactly. Because saying that he was practicing politics the right way basically means, like, the SJW dunk compilations that are purely cut for propaganda on college campuses are actually a profoundly important fixture of American politics, no matter how racist the positioning is. And that, to me, is ridiculous. That's not, like, that's crazy, man. What are we doing? That's all this is.
It's like that. Like, I really do feel, and it's funny because you said something like this in your piece, but it was a little bit more offhanded. That political violence like that is an attack on us all.
Right.
And that in that moment, it creates, for me, even if it's very temporary, that it's important in a moment like that to sort of, come together to try to see other people in their...
I think I might have SJW. Should I get diagnosed? No. The woke mind virus. Let it take over your brain.
Grief, to try to cool things down just a little bit. I guess, given everything you read that Charlie Kirk said, and we probably don't have very different views on the value of the things he said, why do you think he was winning?
I mean, that's not really hard for me to understand. I mean, if I could just back up for a second, I want to say two things. I published a book 10 years ago, Between the World and Me. And one of the constant reactions to that was that it was overly pessimistic about this country. It was overly pessimistic about the future. Why are you so dark, Ta-Nehisi? Why can't you give us any sense of hope? And the reason I would always say is because any sort of sober examination of the history of this country says that those of us who believe in equality, those of us who believe in respecting the humanity of our neighbors and of everyone, that we're up against some really, really powerful forces of history and powerful narratives. And the implication of that is, however good we felt in 2013, 14, 15, 2008, there will be backlash. People, those of us who were crying in 2008 watching Obama, give that speech, those of us who were so moved by watching him and Michelle and step outside the car and felt so much fear for him, and then when nothing happened, felt so great about that. Those of us who believed that seeing a Black family in the White House, mirroring what, some of us felt the best of us was the best that we had to offer, there are other people watching that too. You know what I mean? And I don't take any joy in saying this, but we sometimes soothe ourselves by pointing out that love, acceptance, warmth, that these are powerful forces. I believe they are. I also believe hate is a powerful force. I believe it's a powerful unifying force. And I think Charlie Kirk was a hate monger. I really need to say this over and over again. I have a politic that rejects violence, that rejects political violence. I take no joy in the killing of anyone, no matter what they said. But if you ask me what the truth of his life was, and the truth of his public life, I would have to tell you it's hate. I'd have to tell you it is the usage of hate and the harnessing of hate towards political ends.
Then let me flip that question actually a bit. Why are we losing?
We're losing because there are always moments when we lose.
See, that feels very fatalistic to me.
It doesn't feel fatalistic to me. It feels like the truth. I mean, and let me express what I mean. I'm Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm the writer. I'm the individual, right? But I am part of something larger, and I've always felt myself as part of something larger.
I think the notion that in order for Democrats to win, they have to expand the tent is true on its face. The problem is for Ezra Klein and for numerous other power players within the Democratic Party, the expansion of the tent only goes in the rightward direction. They do not want to expand the tent even from the rightward direction with considerations of the economic harm that all Americans are experiencing. Okay? Because I have no issue with making Republicans, former Republicans, racist Republicans, vote for the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, I want them to vote for whatever the left position party is in this country. That is how you win. The problem is you don't get them to vote for the left flank of the party by becoming more racist. You get them to vote for the left flank party by offering them things that they want. And for a lot of Americans, for a lot of Democrats, especially for a lot of liberals, they think, no, we can't do that. We just must not do that. We must not ever consider that. That is crazy to me. Of course, we want racists and transphobes to no longer be racist or transphobic. But if in the absence of that, we want them to still not vote for the racist and transphobic party. And the way to do that is not by becoming the lighter version of the racist and transphobic party. The way to do that is by offering them shit that they want. The example I used earlier today in the Al Jazeera documentary that's being shot is one I'm going to use once again. Zohran Kwame Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani is a 34-year-old brown African Muslim socialist who has dedicated a good chunk of his activism early on to anti-Zionism. Okay? New York has a significant population of Jewish voters. And yet, the majority of Jews in New York voted for Zohran Kwame Mamdani. Now, does this mean that New York Jews are anti-Zionist in nature? Well, I would like to think so, but seemingly that's not the case, as evidenced by the new polls that came out recently. New polls that came out recently that showed that when polled, New York Jews, 70% of New York Jews had sympathies that were either strongly with Israel or somewhat with Israel, as opposed to strongly with Palestinians or somewhat with Palestinians. 70% of New York Jews strongly still or somewhat still sympathize with Israel over the Palestinians. Okay? Now hold on. Before you say, yikes, oh my God, that's crazy. That was my first reaction as well. That shocked me a little bit. Okay? But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because that means that there were New York Jews who still either strongly or somewhat sympathize with Israel after 22, 23 months of genocide, still looked at the brown Muslim anti-Zionist and said, I'm voting for that guy. What does this mean? That means two things. Number one, Israel obviously is not the number one priority for New York Jews that have sympathies with Israel. That's clear. And this is something that we knew already. I talked about this before about, Jews in the United States of America are not Israeli. If they were, they would live in Israel. There's plenty of benefits to living in Israel as a Jewish person, but they still choose to live in America because they're Americans, okay, first and foremost. That's number one, okay? It's not the highest priority. But number two, and this is even more important, even New York Jews that care about Israel looked at a guy like Zohran and said, you know what I care about more? Fast and free buses and a rent freeze. That's the point. That's why you got to focus on the issues. That's why you have to push for issues. That's why you have to say, I am going to be a fighter for the shit that you care about. I'm going to improve your goddamn material circumstances. That's it. If you look at the numbers, 74% of New York Jews say they strongly or somewhat sympathize with Israelis over Palestinians, and yet Zohran won the majority of Jews in the New York Democratic primary. This means that there were New York Jews who are like, I strongly or somewhat sympathize with the Israelis. This hates Israelis. This hates Israel. I'm still voting for his ass. Why? Because they were like, I want fast and free buses. I want a rent freeze. I want the shit that he's pushing for. Okay? People make these calculations every day. You have to present them with something that they want, and you have to communicate that you are going to be a fighter for those issues. This is what Democrats never do. They are the good things are not possible party. And that's a horrible party to be. That's a horrible position to be in. Because on the other side, you got we're going to fuck shit up party. You got the you're angry and you're right to be angry party. You got you're angry and you're right to be angry, which is why you should be angry at the Mexicans party. And in the absence of any sort of counter narrative against that, when you cannot be well defined on issues that will greatly improve the living standards of every single American, they can just present you as a silly bitch party that only cares about giving bottom surgeries to Guatemalan transgender prisoners. That's it. That's how you lost. That's why you lost the goddamn election. And it's so frustrating to see people like Ezra Klein, who do have a lot of motion in the Democratic Party, still present this alternative that, like, we just simply didn't go right enough. We didn't go right enough to win these voters. You cannot win culture war issues against the Republican Party on the boundaries that they've created. They made the playing game so they can win. They can always go further right. You can't outflank the Republicans on racism. And the question also remains, should you outflank the Republicans on racism? I say no. It blows my mind that there are still so many well-educated liberals who keep pushing this argument. Like, we got to expand the tent to the races. It's like, yeah, we do, but just not in the way that you think. Of course we have to get votes from racists. I agree. A lot of Americans are racist. Of course we got to get votes from transphobes. I agree. A lot of Americans are transphobic. You just don't do that by being transphobic, because no transphobic person is going to vote for you. They're going to go for the real transphobia party. They're going to go for the real racism party. You get them on your side by offering them things that they need. This is how democracy works. And little by little, you convince them that this transphobia shit's also irrelevant to your life, okay? You underestimate how many just want racism and transphobia? I'm not doing that at all. Of course, there are a bunch of delusional, hateful losers out there who are like, no, I want transphobia more than anything else. Who gives a shit? The number of people who are primarily invested in that, in the absence of any sort of Democrat messaging that they can align with, seems consequential. But if there was a left flank party that was simply saying, dude, Medicare fraud, that's what I'm about. I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to give that to you no matter what. A lot less people would find themselves being singularly focused on transphobia, because they would recognize that that shit doesn't actually move the needle. That shit doesn't actually improve their lives at all. Ironically enough, this is a limitation with Ta-Nehisi's assessment as well, because he too is also a liberal, but I don't know where he is on this issue nowadays. Okay? Alice Goldman says, so much ground on basic human rights has been lost in the past 10 years thanks to the Democratic Party consistently trying and failing to woo Republican voters. Notice he didn't put anything in the table that might materially harm him in any ways, a losing strategy. Also, as far as like tacking to the right from his position, there is a gimme right there. It's called saying Israel. And I've never heard Ezra Klein say Democrats need to be on the mountaintops screaming about how Israel sucks dick. Okay? Because that's the broadest coalition that you can win over, for the record. And I hope Ta-Nehisi actually brings that up to him, because honestly, that's a fast pass right there. That's easy street, baby. You come out and you're like, we're the Israel party. We are going to decouple American foreign policy from Israel. Enough is enough. Whoo, god damn. Think about how much you would win in that process. Why does Ezra never talk about that? I don't know. He alludes to it every now and then, but it's a very limited approach. Now, what's interesting, once again, is that abortion doesn't impact him, and yet he has no issues presenting pro-life Democrats as an alternative in red states to win elections. But what's really interesting about that is those exact same states that he presents as like pro-life Democrats potentially winning a broader coalition of right-wing voters are states where they literally voted on ballot measures to protect abortion enshrined in the state constitution. So he's just wrong on every aspect. It blows my mind. Pro-life is perhaps the worst position that he could align himself on, to say we need to expand the umbrella by bringing back pro-life Democrats. Pro-life is not a winning position, it's a losing position. At least he could have done like the classic, everybody hates trans people, we need anti-trans Democrats or some shit, which I still think is up. Which I still think it's unacceptable and up, because you're not going to win any favors with anybody by doing that, as I've assured you, as I've explained to you already, because there's always more anti-trans messaging that will come from the other side. This is at the heart of the problem. This is the problem at the core of the Democratic Party, okay? This is why they lose elections. When you cave to your opposition's framing on culture war narratives, you just legitimize their argument.
I have a tradition. I have ancestry. I have heritage. What that means is that I do whatever I do within the time that I have in my life, whatever time I'm gifted with. And much of what I do is built on what other people did before then. And then after that, I leave the struggle where I leave it. And then hopefully it's in a bad place. Oftentimes it's not. That's the history, in fact. And then my progeny pick it up and they keep it going. I am descended from people who in their lifetime fought with all their might for the destruction of chattel slavery in this country. And they never saw it. They never saw it. In my personal belief system, they died in, defeat, in darkness, And so I guess the privilege that I draw out of this, the honor that I draw out of this, is not that things will necessarily be better in my lifetime, but that I will make the contribution that I am supposed to make. The fact of the matter is, as horrifying as, that the killing of Charlie Kirk was, and as horrifying as the feeling is, this moment that we are in, an era of political violence, and I don't want to sound flip here.
Not to be mean, but Ezra's problem is whiteness. Oh, dude. I mean, not to get all like 2016 BuzzFeed with it, but like, yes. No, 100%. Because like, I have noticed that like the broad majority of like the liberal commentariat that had Ezra style reflections on Charlie Kirk's background and Charlie Kirk's political output do unironically come from that same inability to address like the dehumanization that came along with Charlie Kirk's narratives. I mean, it's true. It's true. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't white people who also had the same opinion of Charlie Kirk as Ta-Nehisi does. Of course, there are, myself included. But like, it is clear that I think it's a inherently reactionary tendency to refuse. It's an inherently reactionary tendency to like refuse to think about the impact that this has on groups of marginalized communities that you are so easily discarding. Okay, that's what this is.
Political violence is the norm for Black experience in this country. It just is. I don't even mean like the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King variety of it, right? Which is the norm too. You would be hard pressed to have a conversation with a Black person in this country that is a descendant of slavery and not have them be able to reach maybe right here or to tell you themselves, look, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they lived in a small town in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Alabama. They got into some sort of dispute with a white man, and either they were lynched or we had to run. Political violence runs through us. It is our heritage. Is that good? No. Do we valorize it? Absolutely not. Do we minimize it? Absolutely not. But a life free of it is not a thing that's really in reach in my time.
Sometimes I think that having a historical scope that wide can make the present too deterministic.
Mm.
So to me, I look at the last, 8, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see having happened is we, the coalition I am in, the things I believe in, lost ground. And people determinedly worked to make that so. Charlie Kirk worked to make that so successfully, right? I think that when he began going to college campuses and putting out a sign at a table, what he was eventually going to build was not obvious, right? I think he worked. I think he was a successful political actor. And I think that from when in 2016, we lost to Donald Trump the first time, very narrowly, won the popular vote, right? And then in 2020, we almost lost to him and began seeing we were losing a bunch of voters we thought we were fighting for, right? Losing more working class voters, losing non-white voters, right? Something was changing, but we won, so okay. And then in 2024, we really got our asses handed to us. And we let a much more dangerous form of politics fully erupt. And I think that reflects strategic decisions they made. I think it reflects decisions we made. So I think for me, it's not enough to say, we lost, there are backlashes, sometimes you lose. I think it requires like a very fundamental rethinking, like a disciplined strategic rethinking of what have we been doing? Why are people preferring this to us? And I do think that is like, it opens up into something more that I think that.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Nothing he said is wrong. What's wrong is his solution. Yeah, of course, in the aftermath of a major political defeat against a party that has historically, in the last 3 decades, never won a popular election victory, with one exception. Of course, it's important to reflect on it. You're not really saying much when you say that, though. You're saying that there must be an autopsy conducted. Yeah, no shit. The issue that I have with Ezra Klein is not that he wants to conduct an autopsy on how the Democrats lost. The issue that I have with Ezra Klein is that his autopsy is wrong.
There is a practice of politics here that in a narrow sense, I was talking about Kirk, but in a broad sense reflects to something that I thought was going to be an argument stretching across the show for like a year, right? I think more of it came out in this than I had intended probably. But I think in many ways we've stopped doing politics. We've written a lot of people off. And in writing them off, we are losing and we are unable to protect ourselves, unable to protect them, just unable to make good change in the world.
Can you say more about that writing them off, please?
Yeah. Why don't we start it here if we want to talk about writing them off? I've been obsessing recently for a piece I've been writing about the Hillary Clinton deplorables comment, and I want to play it.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right?
She was right. She was right. She was goddamn right. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm joking. You shouldn't. Sometimes, even if you're right, you shouldn't say those things. Also, especially if you're someone as patently unlikable as Hillary Clinton, you should never say those things.
They're racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up. He has given voice to their websites that used to only have 11,000 people, now have 11 million. He tweets and retweets. They're offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric. Now, some of those folks, they are irredeemable, but thankfully they are not American.
What do you think when you hear that?
She probably shouldn't have said it.
Do you think it's true?
I mean, it's probably not how I would say it, but, there are things that I would say, I probably would say what I said earlier, in the interview about the force of, and as I've been saying this probably since as long as we've been talking, but I'm not, I just want to be clear about something. I shouldn't be running for president of the United States. You know what I mean? And my expectations for the rhetoric of writers, intellectuals, journalists, et cetera, is very, very different than what the expectation should be for people who expect to hold office.
Yeah, so I agree with, right? I think that there are different jobs in all this. But when I say we began writing people off, I think that's something that happened. And I think something I saw in this debate, but kind of like underneath it, was that the work of politics, of bridging over a lot of profound, fundamental, moral disagreements, I think became somewhat demeaned, diminished. It began to seem like, in many cases, a betrayal to people. The tent shrunk. The people I feel more comfortable with wielding power shrunk. And I think what Clinton was saying there came from somewhere. It came from, the sort of culture that had emerged. It got worse over time. And then I think it really contributed to us losing. And meanwhile, this is why when I say, like in that initial piece, there was something that I respected in what Kirk was doing, like going in, having debates, using them opportunistically. A lot of people throwing back at me that, oh, he wasn't debating to find truth. Of course he wasn't debating to find the truth. He was doing politics. He was trying to persuade people. And I've watched on our side, not opportunistic engagement, but a lot of, I would say, counterproductive disengagement.
The other side of the story about like writing people off that I find to be so silly, because this is like intra-liberal conversations taking place, but like there is also a level of punishment that liberals issue their own popular politicians that like Republicans simply don't. When a Republican says black people are violent, you're writing off all black people, okay? There is no expectation from a Republican politician to actually go back on that. As a matter of fact, many people go, no, hell yeah, say more of it, King. Like that's literally a writing off of a significant chunk of the population. That's 13%. Like at least with Hillary Clinton, when she's saying that thing that Ta-Nehisi says she shouldn't have said as someone running for office, she's writing people off of ideals that they represent and not like some other inalienable trait or characteristic. Racism is not like an unchanging quality.
But would you like to see one of us put up a sign outside of, say, some white evangelical church in Alabama, debate me on abortion, and then use that content to say such and such smashes, you know what I mean, church parishioner here, such and such owns church parishioner?
I would like to see.
Would you like
I would
to
like
see
to
a
see
version
people
of
on
that?
our side. Yeah, go to evangelical churches, go to places that feel unfriendly, have conversations, and look. I put things up on YouTube. They're fairly successful, not the best of the business, and I don't use capital letters destroys in them. I think you can do it more aligned to hopefully our value structure, our political approach, our political aesthetic, at least the one that I believe in. I shouldn't overuse the term "our" here, but we weren't doing that either.
Bro, he wants destiny. That's what he wants. That's what he wants.
No, we weren't. I know, for instance, I don't know if it's on YouTube anymore, but I received an invitation, for instance, I think about when I went up to West Point and I had to go there and talk about Between the World and Me. I had to challenge them very, very directly about what it meant to have, at that time, Confederate memorials up there and to, talk about, a Confederate, I can't remember, what the motto is exactly, but basically it's an argument against lying and what it meant, to have that there and have those grand historical lies. I mean, we had a really, really great interaction. I don't know that, I know everybody didn't agree with me. It would never occur to me, and I think it actually insults the dialogue to take that and say, Ta-Nehisi owns West Point cadets.
You
Ta-Nehisi
really not
smashes.
recognize the kind of culture I'm talking about here? Like, really?
I'm sorry, say more. No,
That's also not the same, because like the comparison that Ezra Klein presents once again is a conflation of ideals, ideology, and characteristics that are unchanging. Okay? Blackness and the concept of being black is not a quality that you can wash off, is not a quality that you can change about yourself, whereas being an evangelical who believes that abortion is murder is a quality that you can reason with or potentially change the minds of people on. This is a fundamental asymmetry that exists in this left-right dynamic that I despise. Do you understand? Like Charlie Kirk wasn't bad because he was just saying that like his economic worldview was about like deregulation and more deregulation and more tax breaks for the wealthy. That wasn't the bad aspect of his doing politics the right way. The bad aspect of it was he would just consistently churn out propaganda that dehumanized marginalized populations, dehumanized people who were just like basically not white and not Christian men. Okay, that's what it is. And this was conducted on prosecuting inalienable characteristics of people and demanding that the government actually do violence to these people on that same virtue or justify the violence that exists. It's very different than just like dunking on an evangelical over their understanding of abortion.
I mean, what do you mean?
I think there really was a move towards the sort of approach Clinton is offering here. I think we began to pull back. I really do.
But maybe it would help if you define
I will define the we,
like,
right? Because I actually think this is a
help.
very hard thing about talking about political parties,
Right.
because they're diffuse,
Right.
right? It's a lot of people doing a lot of things all at once. But I think of the huge backlash to Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan's show because Rogan was transphobic, right? Such a big backlash that when I defended him, I became myself a Twitter trending topic.
Right.
To Elizabeth Warren for going on Bill Maher's show. Bill Maher's Islamophobic, right? There were protests at Netflix when they brought on Dave Chappelle, right? I think there was a politics of content moderation that took hold that was more about enforcing boundaries of what, were and were not ideas we should be engaged with than about engaging them, again, even if opportunistically. And when I go back to something I was saying to you a minute ago, I am in a process right now thinking we failed, right? We lost. The loss is having terrible consequences. What do we need to rethink? How do we become competitive again in places where we're not? And I think there is something in here. Do people feel like even if they...
We are competitive. Once again, his examples that he presented are not even ones that I disagree with. You should go on any and every platform as long as you can be consistent and clear with your vision. I don't disagree with this. And I think the content moderation aspect of this is silly. It's fruitless. It's annoying. It pisses even your own allies off. The problem, of course, is that I was never the guy who was like, how dare Bernie talk to Joe Rogan? I was the guy yelling at the liberals for doing that. I've never been the guy who's like, well, the Bernie bros. I was the Bernie bro. So it's not even something that I disagree with Ezra Klein on, but I do disagree with the way that he presented Charlie Kirk, and I do disagree with the way that he's presenting the concept of spirited debate even in this moment, even if it is to create a successful vehicle of propaganda.
Disagree with us on some things, that they have a place with us. And my experience going around the country talking to people, I've been on a lot of, right of center podcasts lately, is that, rightly or wrongly, like what they took and something that really empowered Trump in the last election was a sense that they didn't. And like we were against them. And if so, they were going to be against us. And I think that's in the end doing politics badly.
So I think two things. I think about how much you argued that like Biden shouldn't run again. What if he doesn't earlier and you have a Democrat who wins the presidency? Like the other big explainers that I can see for it, you know what I mean? That don't feel so diffuse. The other thing is, and I know you don't want to talk historically, but, when you say fatalism, like I take that to mean that what's the point of fighting? But I think that misapprehends the philosophy here. It's not that you know what's going to happen. It's not that Donald Trump is going, it's that you don't underestimate what you are up against. It's actually kind of the opposite. I mean, man, you yourself wrote these articles about how high the level of racial resentment was, that this country, or some segment of it was so, as the term was used at the time, racially resentful. I call it racist, but racist, that it flooded down to Barack Obama's dog, Bo. Mm-hmm. That's not a small amount of power. Like, that's not a small force. And so, just really quickly getting back to Charlie Kirk, like, I would watch those clips of him saying those things, man, and I would see how people would cheer and get charged by it. People get activated by hate. It's a very, very, very strong force. And so I don't think it requires you to feel that you will eventually lose. On the contrary, I think it requires you to feel that even if you do lose, you have this kind of steadfastness, you know what I mean, to keep going.
In today's super competitive business environment, the edge goes to those who push hard.
This is a great point. And I think I really saw it, in some ways more in Trump's first term, but I see it now too, which is the worse from your perspective, my perspective, the other side gets, the more people want their reaction to sort of be, and their strategy to be emotionally consonant with how they're feeling about it. Mm. Because these people are so bad, there can be no quarter, right? I had somebody we both know, I'll say an eminent academic of one form or another, email me after these pieces and just say to me like, we are not on the same side anymore, right? The what I was doing was too far, right? Like we are just not on the same side, if I could say these things. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling right now that we are closer to genuine national rupture, certainly been in my lifetime, right? The idea that this experiment, that America could topple into something else, into something much worse, into some kind of new extended regime, feels very real to me, right? I remember when I was on the Why We're Polarized book tour.
I interviewed you for it.
You did, yeah. The end of that book is this recitation of what happened in the 1960s, the political assassinations, the violence in the streets, like what the state was doing, what was happening. But on the book tour, what I would say is my nightmare scenario is that level of violence and fracture with these kinds of parties, where politics is not for all of its flaws, a calming force, because like the views are diffuse across the two parties, but an accelerant. And I think we're much more now in the world I was hearing. Okay, so I think it should make you think, okay, what is some kind of de-escalation before you get to rupture look like? But the other is that there are a lot of people who live in places we used to win not that long ago. So I've been thinking about Obamacare. When Obamacare passes, there are Democratic senators in Arkansas, in Louisiana, in West Virginia, in Missouri, in Indiana, in North Carolina, in South Dakota, in North Dakota. And I've been thinking that I think for a lot of us, to twist the line about capitalism, it has become easier to imagine the end of the country than winning a Senate seat in Missouri.
I can't believe you just bastardized the Mark Fisher quote. That's crazy. Bastardizing the Mark Fisher quote to talk about the inability of Democrats winning red states is crazy. Okay, let's just continue.
Or Arkansas. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. So I think a couple things about that. First of all, I just want to bring in the
okay, everybody. One thing that you fundamentally misunderstand about Ezra Klein liberalism, is that in many ways he's actually not dissimilar to the way that Destiny presents itself, even though Destiny is a mercenary. He doesn't really give a shit about anything. But for Ezra Klein, the epitome is letting the Democratic Party win. When he says, oh, we have to let the Democratic Party win, we have to do anything in our power to let the Democratic Party win. What he's trying to say is, because when the Democratic Party wins, and I'm sure he'll explain it in a second, to Tonight's quotes, it's still better than when the Republicans win. Okay? That's what his argument is. So everything that actually plays a role in undermining the chances of the Democrats winning is actually wrong and bad. If the Democrats are going further and further to the right, at least they're not going to be as bad as the Republicans are. That's a problem. That is an issue. That is at the heart of my disagreement with someone like Ezra Klein, is that while marginal harm reduction narratives are theoretically true, this presents itself as a trap in the Overton window, shifting further and further to the right as the Democrats capitulate the right-wing framing on all these issues. So that's number one. And number two, you usually end up losing anyway, because it's not a good way to present yourself. And we just lost this last election on those boundaries.
Historical perspective, not that long ago, I can remember when Obama won. And I believe you would remember this too. And there were all of these pieces about the end of conservatism and the end of the Republican Party. You don't know how it's going to go. Nobody really, it doesn't mean you shouldn't think about how it's going to go. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but no one really, I mean, again, and
in 2005, there were all these pieces about the end of the Democratic Party.
It was.
Right? Democrats had lost touch with the heartland.
Yeah.
Right? They were never going to get it back.
That's right. And so I think it's always like important to keep that in the background. Look, I have, just in terms of bridging gaps and everything, I have a basic level of respect that I accord to everybody. You know what I mean? I want to say what I have to say. I don't want to shrink back from it. You know what I mean? But I do think on a basic level, there's a respect that has to be had for people that I disagree with, right? At the same time, I recognize that part of my audience, and I would say an important part of my audience, is people who have never enjoyed that respect. You know what I mean? People who, in fact, are subjects of the kind of hate that Charlie Kirk was harvesting. And I can't ever, A, contribute to making them feel like they've been abandoned. And B, I can't ever stand by and watch somebody do that. And in the name of unity or whatever, act like that's not happening, because there are real consequences. And so it's like, when I read his words towards trans people, Jesus, when I read, you know what I mean, the language towards Haitians specifically, which was very, very, Haitians will become your masters if you don't elect Trump. I mean, this is very, very familiar to me. You know, it's this idea of Haitians coming into the country or immigrants raping your daughters. I mean, this was really, really, really dark stuff. It's at the core of this country. And so I feel like for Haitian immigrants that are in, Ohio, who are living under the weight of this, for trans kids who, you know what I mean, are dealing with, being, I don't even want to use the term bully, beaten up, attacked, threatened. You know what I mean? It's very, very important to me, given the post I have, to say I see you, but also this dude was wrong. And I'm all for unifying, I'm all for bridging gaps, but not at the expense of my neighbor's humanity. I just can't.
I think the thing we go to there, right? Not at the expense of my neighbor's humanity.
It's like, well, I can. Well, let me tell you how I can. Oh, don't worry, I can. Hold on. I'll explain.
Because I've gotten a lot of that in email, right? Like, how am I supposed to talk to these people? How am I supposed to deal with these people who are denying my humanity?
I'm not against talking to him about it. I'll talk to you very clearly.
Yeah, sure.
I have no problem with that.
I guess the place where I'm not even 100% sure if we disagree, if you just like sort of see your role differently, right? I think that in losing as badly as we have imperiled trans people terribly.
Yes.
Politics is for power.
Joe Biden did that.
Politics is for power.
He's doing it. He's doing exactly what I said he was going to do. He's going to tell you that, and by the way, this is a wrong statement that he's going to deliver, but don't you think things would be better for trans people right now if Kamala Harris, after making concessions about transphobia and leaning into anti-trans narratives, if she had won, don't you think things would be better for trans people as opposed to right now? The reason why this is wrong is twofold. Number one, at that point, all you've done is, once again, concede to the right-wing framing on trans people presenting some outsized harm to the American population. It's not only incorrect, but it's a harmful narrative, and you've leaned into it. And in that process of leaning into it, you have normalized it. You have legitimized the claims of your opponent. Number two, your opponent, in the aftermath of that recognition, will just turn around and say, see, these pro-trans losers even recognize I'm right. Vote for me. I will deal with the trans people with the integrity necessary. Okay? So not only do you look hypocritical, but you end up losing for that reason. Because you can never defeat the Republicans on hate mongering. You just can't. Okay? The second part of the story that is also objectionable, which I have not even waited for his statement, by the way, and I'm already arguing against what I know he's going to say with my heart of hearts because I've heard it so many goddamn times from other liberals, is that Joe Biden was president when Republicans were aggressively hitting the anti-trans narratives and also successfully implementing anti-trans legislation at the state legislature level already, building the framework for what came next. And in the absence of fighting back against that, the administration also allowed this to happen in some very meaningful ways. Anyway, let's hear what Ezra has to say, though.
And so I think that the question I am just genuinely struggling with isn't how to have like a great kumbaya moment. But I think it is taking seriously that something we're doing is not working. I mean, I had Sarah McBride, who's the first trans member of Congress on the show. And, you know, we were talking about every single survey you can offer on like trans rights has gone in the wrong direction the past couple of years, right? We've just begun to lose that argument terribly. And that has put people in real danger. So I take your point when you say, look, I want people to feel seen in my writing. And I want people to feel seen in my writing and my podcasting. But I think the place I'm trying to push towards is I think that there is a diminishment of the political coalition building that we now need to do because we have come to the view that a pretty wide variety of people are in some ways kind of deplorables. I think it's weakened a bit in the last couple of years.
I would never use that language. Jesus Christ.
But
like that's not, so when you ask me about that Hillary Clinton, that's what, like, I would never say it like that.
That's great. I think it's good that you wouldn't say it like that, but and I'm not saying
I don't even think that, by the way. Like, right. I don't even focus on people. Look, I am at war with certain ideologies and ideas. And I want them expunged. I want to turn them into phrenology. That's what I want. But I don't want the people. You know what I mean?
Not a timely reference. Because if there's one ideology that was destroyed thoroughly, dismantled intellectually, that is making a major comeback, it is probably phrenology. So, oops. Oops, phrenology is back.
Ouch. Like when you start talking about who people are and their bones, like that.
So in a way, I'm not sure. I mean, in a way, I think we're saying something not too dissimilar here. I guess the place where I felt a lot of pushback, and maybe this was not your pushback, right?
Except for cop phrenology, that's a real study. That's a real scientific study, as you guys know.
Was, the first piece I can just sort of, like, I accept that there's a disagreement on, like, what to do in the 24 hours after a death. Like, you feel like I was whitewashing the guy, and I felt like I was sort of... Yeah, I know you do. I know you do.
It's very upsetting.
I know you do. The second piece I did, which I think you saw, was more about this question of, what are we going to do? living here in sort of two types of disagreement, right? One with a right where Charlie Kirk has become sort of the center of it, right? He's not unusual for the MAGA coalition. He's a sort of uniting force within it and the kind of things he believed and the way he did his politics. And then two, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to be here with people who are like halfway there, right? What does it mean to be in this political community together? What do you think about that question?
About how to live together?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's a truth. You know what I mean? I think it's it's a foregone, like we are. I really, really believe that, There's no real choice about this. I'm not renouncing my American citizenship. They're not renouncing their American citizenship. So this then, as far as I'm concerned, is a contest of ideas and narratives. Again, all I can go to is my role as a writer. And my role as a writer is to state things as clearly as I possibly can, to make them in such a way that they haunt, to state truths, and to reinforce probably the animating notion of my politics. And that is that all humanity is equal and is worthy of that. And I actually think all of the sort of political and policy positions are, that I probably find myself in sympathy with, are attempting to affect that, in the real world. And again, I'm putting aside your piece, but I'm just thinking about the moment we're in. When I hear or see people who are honored and commemorated in such a way so that they almost become a national religious figure, and then I see their content, and I see that their content is actively destructive to humanity, I have to draw a line there. Like, I think, like, for me, like, the bigger question is, where are the lines? You know what I mean? And I think there's no problem with saying, listen, you can't hurl epithets at people. You're out if you do that. I'm sorry. Look, you want to have a debate about whether we should have affirmative action, in colleges? I'm here for it. You want to have a debate?
What does it mean to be on the other side of the line?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
What is it? So once somebody's on the other side of the line,
right?
What does that mean for you?
For instance, once you think it's okay.
No.
No, I'm trying to make this concrete.
Yeah, no, I am too.
Yes.
Once, for whatever the definition of the line is.
Right.
What does it mean for you for somebody to be on the other side of it? Right? Not somebody who just died.
Right.
But somebody still living.
Right. If you think it is okay to dehumanize people, then conversation between you and I is probably not possible.
And so what do you do with the fact that so many people think that is okay?
I think what you try to do is, again, this is the difference, right? Like, I don't necessarily have the crystal ball to say that in this time, I'm going to be able to convince a majority of people that, for instance, let's just take the thing that's hot right now. Trans folks are human beings and deserve humanity. Although I think most people know that you shouldn't say what he said. Like, that shit is rude. It's just rude to talk to people like that. And I think most people know that. So it's something.
I can't believe I'm actually finding myself in between both of these thinkers in this issue. I believe that if society, let's say tomorrow society is a Nazi society, okay? And we are functioning within a Nazi society, and that might be actually a lot closer than you think. In that situation, there is value to addressing the dehumanizing rhetoric, okay? There's value to doing other things as well, but there's a value to, at least when you are trying to win favor with those in the margins, that makes sense. This is why I didn't have an issue talking to Charlie Kirk, despite his dehumanizing rhetoric of a bunch of different groups. Not because I think that is appropriate or because it's my privilege showing, right? But because I understood that a lot of people shared his sentiment, and he was a beacon for this kind of ideology that, and not only was he a beacon for this kind of ideology, but he was also straightforwardly like a part of the Trump administration, right? So if tomorrow Nick Fuentes became Charlie Kirk, I would debate Nick Fuentes because there is value in doing that. Only because if they reach a level of prominence, like, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with the ideology. You have to dismantle it. You have to tackle it. Having said that, however, you are under no obligation to engage in sort of post-mortem whitewashing and legacy building for people who have engaged in that sort of commentary.
In my way through the question, I actually think that's not a hard line to draw. I think not calling people out of their name, I think that's actually a basic value that most people have. And I think people who think it's not, who are pushing that, are actually themselves on the other side of the line.
But so I want to hold on this for a minute, because I do think this is like a very
and that's
core
different
question.
from policy, Ezra.
Yeah, I understand it's different than policy.
That's different than policy.
I think that one just reality is the president of the United States is a person who, in his comportment as a human being on the public stage, I would have said in 08, in 12, in 16, should be on the other side of the line.
Yeah.
I think he's a person who does not act with any sense of public or even personal decency.
Right.
And then he won in 16, lost sort of narrowly in 20 and then won in 2024. And I think the thing that has led to for me is recognizing that I don't get to draw the line. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have one in my own heart, but I think that is the thing that I am struggling with, which is not only is he clearly, for most people, or a lot of people, plurality of the voters in the last election, not somehow way over the line, but that means it's a lot of people who are willing to accept things that I thought we would have found unacceptable. If you had told me, I would have thought that the way he acts in public is unacceptable, and it's not. And so I think for me, and this goes back to maybe the culture that you feel didn't exist, but I feel did, that there was a view that we could sort of work with politics with drawing these lines, that there were people going to be inside them and outside them, and we could work that way. And I think that I am working with the question of what happens if you don't believe that, if you don't control the line. What I see is any line that existed at all collapsing. So I'm watching Holocaust revisionism on the biggest right-wing podcasts, right? I'm watching Tucker Carlson turn into, what I would describe as a white nationalist and become an absolute dominant.
Turn into? I'm sorry. What year is this? Is it 2025 or is it 2016? Is it 2012? Turn into is crazy. Yo, God damn, dude. This is, it's taking a lot of effort for me to not recognize that for Ezra and for many of these liberals, the only time they can recognize, and I don't even think this is their fault. I don't think this is Jewish exceptionalism. I don't think this is any of that shit. I just think that this is a byproduct of the way we understand bigotry and the way we've been taught, the false way that we have been taught about fascism, that the only time these guys recognize that someone is being a white nationalist is if they're being anti-Semitic, if they're leaning into anti-Semitic narratives. Okay? And I think this is a byproduct of the way that we are taught about the Holocaust and the way that we are taught about the Nazis' rise to power in our school system, the way that a lot of advocacy groups hyper focus on that element of fascism as opposed to all the other elements. So as long as someone is not an overt anti-Semite in the Republican Party, people don't understand that they are being white nationalists. Okay? It's kind of crazy. If someone is, and as long as someone is pro-Israel, they don't even recognize that they're being, someone is being anti-Semitic anyway. For most liberals, and especially all the Republicans, as long as someone is pro-Israel, they can also get away with being an anti-Semitic too. It's a very frustrating reality to exist in.
And force on the right, bigger than he ever was in his, smarmy libertarian phase. And this stuff has real appeal, as you said, right? That's not a surprise on some level. It's just something you have to deal with.
His smarmy libertarian phase was where he talked about Iraqis being primitive apes that deserve to be bombed back to the Stone Ages. You know what I mean?
And so that's where this question of the line drawing, I have lines what I think should and should not be acceptable, but those lines clearly have no relationship to my country, the politics. And I think I've been asking the question without really having an answer. I want to be honest about this. What follows from that?
I think you do have a line.
I'm sure I do.
I think there are things, for instance, that I could say that would make you say it's no point in Ta-Nehisi coming up and being on this podcast. And likewise, there are things you could say. Obviously, I would say it's no point in me talking to Ezra.
Yeah. I'm saying, what happens if 35% of the country, 40% of the country, the dominant political force in the country is inside that? Does that change anything? Or no, the line just holds?
No. I mean, welcome to Black America. That's our history. The line we have drawn in general has not been majoritarian politics, unfortunately. That's just been what it is, And at the times that it's been majoritarian politics, people have done things and, fiddled with government or done, extremely violent things to make it not so, How
do you deal in that answer? How do you deal with Trump really substantially increasing his share of the black vote?
Actually, I think where he is about where actually Republicans tended to be before Barack Obama. So I'm a little less. I mean, there's a conservative portion of our community that's always voted Republican. And I think, obviously I think sexism is a very, very real force. I don't think it's completely explanatory, but the idea that there is, say, 20% of black men who are fundamentally conservative, that doesn't really surprise me too much.
But I guess let's take
the other side of the story also. I think this is my meta. I've brought this up to FD Signifier as well. But I think that the further you move away from the gains that black people exhibited, the black people saw in their own real lives during the civil rights struggle given to them by the Democratic Party, the more black people decouple themselves as a reliable voting bloc of the Democratic Party. Now, of course, there's still a long way to go in terms of like a full decoupling, like black people becoming like party agnostic. But there is a reason why younger black men and even some younger black women, but specifically younger black men, find themselves not leaning on the Democrat Party vote in the same way that older black men do, because they have not seen the modern Democratic Party make any inroads that seek to identify and directly help their communities. If the Democrats still carried the torch of the civil rights movement, I think this would be a non-starter. But the fact that they don't, I think, plays somewhat of a role. But as I've said, even when Obama was talking about like misogyny and yada yada yada, and talking about like, black men, you hate women, I think, or whatever the fuck I said over and over again, the hyper focus on the black vote is silly, because black men, black women, obviously, black women vote for the Democrats by Assad numbers. It's like unheard of any demographic being this reliable of a voter bloc. They just, it's unheard of. But also black men in general also are still fairly reliable voters of the Democratic Party anyway. And that any attention shifted away from the white population and the way that they vote back to like black men and singling out black men is in my opinion, a liberal version of the same, calling into question black people's loyalty to the Democratic Party. It's just like a liberal way of saying like, what's up with that? Did you say Assad numbers? Yes. Black women as a reliable voting bloc for the Democratic Party is so unimaginably high that it literally only exists in fake democracies like Vladimir Putin. Okay? Like it only, like it happens in this democracy, but it is the only example.
Because I think this is a hard case. I think from your perspective and from my perspective, we probably don't believe hugely different things. Mm-hmm. A huge amount of the country, right? A majority of the country believes things about trans people, about what policy should be towards trans people, about what language is acceptable to trans people, that like we would see as fundamentally and morally wrong.
Right.
And what politically, not in a column or something, but politically, should our relationship with those people be? Do we win them over? Do we compromise with them? Like this feels like a very salient question. The Republican Party is going to make sure this is a relentlessly salient question.
Right.
So
I agree with that.
Where does the approach leave us? Right? Where do we go on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Look, I think a couple things. I think, again, look, my tradition is the only thing I have a reference point for, so I'm sorry to keep going back to this. But when I look at the times that we have lost...
This person just keeps saying, literally focus on affordability. Just focus on affordability and say their landlord isn't trans. Yes, I know. One of the first things I did when moving to Washington, D.C. in 2015 was, of course, go to the bar and get a grasp of the social life. When I first heard someone say in a hushed reverence, oh my God, that's Ezra Klein over there. This was my face. How can anyone read this and not go, shit, this is so obvious and clear now as far as like fascism? Adam Cocker says, want the actual answer? Go through each U.S. state curriculum requirement for World War II in history class. They all focus on U.S. involvement in Europe, the Pacific Theater, and the reaction on the home front. And then states diverge, where many states do not require any curriculum on the rise of the Third Reich or Mussolini or any other rise of fascism. We are seeing step-by-step uncanny parallels, and the reason that Europeans, Canadians, Brits, and luckily still some parts of the U.S. are fortified against it because they actually know what fascism and its rise looks like. I disagree. I don't think that when you talk about Gaza, are you going to talk about Trump and BB's new Gaza deal? See, you're a subscriber to the Piker Broadcasting Service, which means that you can actually go back and rewind and watch me talk about it for hours. And before this Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ezra Klein hash out the Charlie Kirk disagreement video that we dived into.
If I think specifically about the Black tradition, for instance, it's hard for me to say politically they did something wrong. You know what I mean? Like Reconstruction falls. What was the thing that should have been done? On the contrary, I see, a kind of courage that I wish we had today in a lot of people. You know what I mean? I see people willing to die and take bullets all the time. You know what I mean? What more could Ida B. Wells have done, to get the anti-lynching bill passed? I mean, here is somebody that, was banished from Tennessee on threat of being killed after she saw her friends, murdered and lynched. And one of the things I will say is when I look back at that long tradition and I look back in the times that people have won and the places they've won, it's often not been their heroism that was the decisive factor ultimately. It's often not been their strategy that was the decisive factor. Folks look back at the civil rights movement, for instance, and they talk about how brilliant it was to do the sit-ins and, use mass media in the way that Martin Luther King used mass media, the appearance. All of that's true. But if we don't have World War II, and the planet does not get a view of how horrific it can be when you decide you're going to eliminate people based on their traits, civil rights movement happened? I don't know. I think windows open and close. And so I think some of this is up to the decisions that politicians make. I think some of it is also up to what is happening in the broader mass culture at the time. I think all this kind of, works together. I'm not against, this kind of strategizing. I think that has to happen. But I think you also have to recognize like how broad the world is when you say politics.
In today's super competitive business environment, the edge goes.
Actually, I think been a very prime mover in this. I think there's been a period, particularly on the left, in which the Civil War, pre-it, post-it, the writings of that time, the people of that time, have become a sort of a rooting period, a place where we sort of go back and look and think about who are we, what was revealed about us. I'm taking nothing away from that.
Right.
But that's obviously a period where politics ultimately fails. I actually think, and I've thought about this a lot in reaction I have read in the last couple of weeks, I've thought a lot about how many people believe we are already in a cold civil war, that we are in a time that we are dealing with divisions and questions. I see it on the right, for sure. I hear it on the left. I have a lot of email that's like, we need a national divorce. How that's going to be effectuated, never exactly clear.
They do
use that.
Do people you respect say that to you?
Well, yes, actually, I will say that. But I'm not going to, people say things to me that are off the record and I shouldn't say it. But you don't believe that though, right? You don't believe we are at a point. I think this is really important. I was curious what you would say to this question. You don't believe we are at a point where the next 10, 20, 30 years can't be shaped by decisions we would understand is within normal politics, within elections and legislation and organizing and so on.
No.
Good. I think that's great.
I mean, look, that could happen.
Yeah.
That could happen. But I guess the broader thing I am thinking about is how much does this era stand out in the long sweep of American history?
Yeah.
It's bad.
Well, so this is actually...
But it wouldn't make my list for the worst.
No, I agree with you. I'm where you are on this,
right.
To just be super clear.
Okay.
But I actually think one reason then the amount we focus on the Civil War period.
Yeah, he's framing the Civil War itself as a failure of politics. I argue that the war was politics itself is 100% correct. This is the problem with liberals, man. They just don't comprehend that politics is a distribution of resources and power. Okay, that's what politics is. And one of the most consequential aspects of power is violence. Who gets to do it? Who gets to be the recipient of said violence? And he thinks politics is just like people chirping at one another, like a team sport or something. And that's not what this is. Politics is when podcast, politics is when debate. Because the assessment in that situation completely turns a blind eye to the ongoing violence and the abject horrors of chattel slavery. Okay? Of course, nobody wants violence to take place of any sort. But that's what the abolitionists were fighting against anyway. They were fighting against the systematized version of violence that many turned a blind eye to or would die defending. I think in many instances, like, this is something that I tried to bring up in the New York Times piece that I wrote as well, where it's like, the difference with Charlie Kirk is that his death was not unique. Okay. America is a very violent country. The exceptional nature of his death was that it was in one of the few instances directed at someone in a position of power, someone with a position of prominence. Because, and this isn't to say that it's appropriate. Of course it's inappropriate. It's completely morally repugnant. Okay. But the children that get slaughtered and the teachers that get slaughtered in school shootings are also still human beings. We've just completely shut off our brain and desensitized to that sort of violence happening all the time. That's it. And I think, like, for Ezra Klein, I think that's where his fears stem from as well, which is that violence could turn its crosshairs, its ugly crosshairs, on someone like himself, or even, I've talked about this very honestly as well. Like, this is I'm too close to the situation. If you recall, this is what I said over and over again. But if I were to pull myself out of it for a brief moment and engage in any sort of like systematic analysis, this kind of violence is ongoing and ever present. One great example is the mass shootings that took place this past week. Over the course of 24 hours, 2 Iraq war veterans went and engaged in acts of domestic terrorism. One in North Carolina on a boat, pulling up to a bunch of restaurants and shooting at people inside of those restaurants and killing 2 people, I believe. And then the other in Michigan at a Mormon church. I think there was 3 actually, but the 2, yeah, I believe there was actually 3 mass shootings that took place, not even 2. Okay, the numbers keep growing. People are saying Texas, Michigan, North Carolina. Now they're saying 4. Jesus Christ. See, that's what I mean. It's like it's ordinary. It shouldn't be, but it is. I disagree a lot with the conclusion you came to. The issue is that the entire time the side who mad about Kirk has said people kill people, guns don't kill people, and a single person killed behind a person. They said, we know the solution is an entire group of people. Yeah, those guys are assholes and opportunists, man.
Is tricky is because that's a period when it didn't work like that, right? You actually had to go over the cliff of that and have the war. I've been thinking a lot about, because I've been reading a lot about McCarthyism. So I've been thinking about that whole period. And
he's like, I agree with it. No, I'm just kidding. He's going to be like, McCarthy has some good ideas.
You just sort of brought up the World War II as, sort of a generator of the politics that allows us to have the Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, et cetera. I think another way of sort of glossing that is you have the rise of Red Scare politics, which predate McCarthy. You have Joseph McCarthy, who is just for a period an unbelievably dominant force.
It's insane.
Everybody who challenges him loses.
That's right.
He becomes a complete kingmaker. He's eventually boxed out and beaten by...
Is he saying Joseph McCarthy was doing politics the right way? I'm going to lose my mind, bro. Joseph McCarthy was doing politics the right way, just like Charlie Kirk.
Dwight Eisenhower, sort of center-right, very, very anti-communist politician, but who can sort of take the center from McCarthy. But then it's like, what happens next? Nixon, who is the genteel red baiter to McCarthy's non-genteel red baiter, runs in the next election. He's beaten by JFK, who's a very center-left, very anti-communist, sort of runs to Nixon's right on communism. And he does it with Lyndon Johnson, on the bottom of the ticket, sort of representing Southern politics in the Democratic Party. It's a very, very, in a way, checkered series of moves that are accepting huge amounts of McCarthyism at that time. And yet it does sort of lead to political power that is then wielded in a very, very different way within fairly short order. I take from this, I've been thinking about this because I think we're sort of in a new McCarthyism, some lessons on how politics can work and like the give and the take of it. We've been sort of brought up the Civil War a bunch, but what do you take from this period?
I take something that we've kind of been circling for this entire conversation, which is that the role of politicians and the role of writers, intellectuals, et cetera, is very, very different. Politicians do things that I wouldn't do. I don't for instance, I don't hold JFK or RFK up, you know what I mean, as the people
me
I would,
neither.
right? yeah.
I'm not a fan of JFK Camelot revisionism.
But, you know, I guess
it's not a very good president.
That's like a separate thing from whether, you know what I mean, why politics happens the way they do. Let me give you an instance that often also comes up. That's not the Civil War, and that's the New Deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there is a pretty strong argument that the New Deal not a strong argument, but it's pretty clear that the New Deal did quite a bit to create the social safety net, expand, create an American middle class, right? That's true. Did FDR want to, in his heart, exclude Black folks in the way that they were excluded from it? No. That was the price of getting the thing done. I understand that as politics. But were I there in that time, it would be incumbent on me to yell at FDR to not do that. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's really, 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 really important. We don't all have the same role. You know, when I wrote Case for Reparations, it was not my expectation, nor did I even think it would be politically intelligent for like Barack Obama to go up and yell, "I'm for reparations." You know what I mean? But that's different than, you know what I mean, my role. Yeah.
I guess the substructure of a bunch of what I am saying, which may or may not be in argument with you. It's just, right. When I texted you to come on, I was like, I've been thinking about what the underlying arguments are here. Mm-hmm, so you're kind of getting this spilling out of my brain. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a work of politics that for a bunch of different reasons has become demeaned. And I think, and this does not speak well of the people, so to speak, in power doing it, but I think that they are not doing it well. I think the culture around them, I think politicians are not always leaders. I think they're often followers. And
dude, the crisis at the heart of liberalism is their inability to actually lead and constantly find themselves in a defensive posture against increasingly violent reactionary sentiment. Ezra Klein is quite literally advancing that same crisis every time he speaks on these issues and says, there is no other option. We just have to cower in fear. They are far too powerful. Someone like Zohran Mamdani obviously directly betrays this notion. And I don't know what his assessment of someone like Zohran Mamdani looks like. I don't think he's like outwardly anti-Zohran, for the record. He wouldn't dare. But I suspect that his analysis of Zohran probably leads to all the same wrong assessments that many prominent Democrats make. How big is Ezra's audience? Do people actually listen to this and get something? Ezra Klein is the lib whisperer, okay? Right now in this country, if there's one person that like all of the liberals in prominent positions of power listen to, I would say it's Ezra Klein. Like people who, like the audience is not massive. If you were to look around and ask your random friends who the Ezra Klein is, random people that like work regular jobs and shit. No, he doesn't have that kind of motion, but it doesn't matter. He has, it's the same reason why I don't mind getting written up in the New York Times, because like people with prominence, people with institutional power read the New York Times and get their notes from the likes of Ezra Klein. And as that is his job, he does he plays that role very decently by constantly telling liberals in positions of power with a lot of wealth that they're not wrong, that economic arguments can only be done within the confines of neoliberalism and the public-private partnership, and that the way to win over more people is by going further and further right on social issues, as opposed to going further left on economic issues, which would most likely bring a lot more people from the said right flank of American politics back to voting for the Democrats. You're not wrong. My dad, who thought Kamala Harris went too far right, loves abundance. Oh my God, your dad is an abundist? That's crazy.
I think that the idea that kind of political coalition building across these gigantic differences, building across public opinion, both not just as you wish it existed, but as it exists, has become, seen and like treated as often betrayal, cowardice, moral fallibility. It's not, I think it's fine to say people got different roles. And in fact, it's good for intellectuals to criticize the politicians. But my view is that the political practice became too weak. I don't think that was true for Obama. I went back preparing to talk to you and I read your piece. My president was black.
I saw this.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
And it's very much in this tension, right? Where you say quite a bit, like, it would have been a bad idea for Barack Obama to say the things I am saying here.
Yeah.
To do the things in some ways I wish he had done. It would have been, that politics wouldn't have worked. There would have been no Obama presidency, and his presidency would not have been successful. And I think I've been thinking about that line, right? In my own work and just in the political culture as I see it, that line between the sort of intellectual, analytical work and the actual work of politics, the how do we live here with each other work, right? Which I think is actually honorable work. And I think feels right now to me morally urgent and necessary. And not just over disagreement, just the whole thing being done in a strategic and disciplined sense. I think one of the things I've thought about is the need to actually raise the status of just old-fashioned politics. And I think I've been surprised to find myself feeling that way. But I think one way the second Trump term has changed me is I don't, and maybe you always believe this, right? I'm not putting this on you. I think what got built, for all of its flaws in the back half of the 20th century, was much more fragile than I'd understood. Not just the legislation or any of that, but the actual sense of what you could and could not do, what we would and would not accept. And I've just the sense that we can just tumble all the way back has become much more real to me. And so the work that people did to begin to build those guardrails and how hard that actually was, and at this point we eventually, I feel like we began to take something actually quite beautiful for granted. Or only see what wasn't there as opposed to what was. And it's forced a little bit of, for me, how did they do it? How did they get out of the last one of these?
I'll just say, and I think I'm speaking for a broader community here. We are not happy, but we are not surprised, man. And again, the reason why we go back to Reconstruction and the Civil War is because it is, before the 1960s, the only glimpse at the possibility of a real democracy in this country. And it happened. And in some places, it was actually quite successful. You have people who, had been enslaved, who are written off as illiterate fools, who, serving in legislatures. And actually, with the standard of the time, actually, it's such a hopeful, incredible story. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it was violently destroyed. Once you see that, and once you have that in your heritage, once you, understand it, once you understand that Martin Luther King.
Ezra Klein is a Stalin quote, given human form. You mean social democrats are social fascists? Is that what you're saying?
Could be standing up.
The problem is, I don't even think he's a social democrat. So I wish he was a social democrat, man. I wish he was a social fascist.
telling his own people, we do not embrace violence at all. It is morally repugnant. We embrace love. And that could get you shot. Not burn it down. Love can get you shot. You just have a different view of your country. It is not, I emphasize this over and over again, it is not a fatalistic view. It is not, it is written in stone that we will ultimately lose, but you understand that losing is a possibility.
But so then what does that, there's a Buddhist meditation I like. This is a weird place to go. But it goes like this. I'm of the nature to grow sick. I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to lose the people I love. I'm of the nature to die. How then shall I live? And
Love that.
Yeah, I do it because sometimes you need the reminder.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying in a way is we are of the nature too.
Yeah.
And I think the place I'm trying to push is then, how then shall we live? Because in this distinction you're making between you would have been there correctly yelling at FDR. And I'm not asking you, but me, right? My work, my role.
Can you answer that? Can you say I think it's a good point. Would you define for me how you see what your role is?
I don't know what my role is anymore. I'll be totally honest with you, man. I feel very conflicted about that question. The role I want to have is a person curiously exploring his political and intellectual interests in political peacetime. And the role I somehow have is sometimes that. But I am in the business, I'm a political opinion writer and podcaster and so on. And I'm in the business of political persuasion. And I feel like me and the people who believe what I believe, not narrowly speaking, but the whole broad coalition, have failed in a really consequential way. And I think it is.
You feel like you failed in your work?
I think there are places I failed. I mean, I think there are things I got right too. Like,
yes, you did. I mean, it's true. You did objectively. The Democratic Party has been abiding by the Ezra Klein worldview, not singularly responsible, right? Ezra is not singularly responsible for this. No one is. But the Democratic Party has been actively positioning himself in the exact ways that Ezra wants them to, whether because they listen to him or not, doesn't matter. Like, that is what the output is of the Democrats. So in some ways, yes, I think this is a massive failure for sure. And I would go so far as to say that, like, Ezra Klein, Matty Iglesias, these guys are almost reactionary in the way that they identify, they follow the lead of those in power, and they actively try to normalize the ways in which the power structure should not be harmed in any capacity. The hierarchy should remain the same, and work within the confines of permission, where they just say, like, yeah, things are getting really bad. Here's how the Democrats could win, and therefore maybe potentially put a stay of execution on American fascism happening. If fascism is the execution of American democracy, then the only way to do that is by just pausing that slow burn towards fascism, or the accelerated pace of moving the direction of fascism. There's no vision there, I think, of a better future. There's no vision of, like, undermining the existing hierarchies. There's no alternative vision whatsoever. Do you think you could set up a meeting with Ezra? Maybe. I mean, I would love to. I did talk to Ross, and Ross is the center-right version of Ezra's supposedly center-left version from the New York Times standards. So
I think we shouldn't have run Joe Biden again. I think I was right about that. I think I've gotten a lot right, but I think I've gotten definitely things wrong. But I think we are here now, right? That's what I would really say. And it is forcing me to rethink things I would prefer not to rethink. I will give you an example because people are mad at me on this one right now.
Please.
I said in a podcast with my colleague, Russ Stout, that he was pushing me on left radicalism. I was saying, I don't care about left-wing radicalism. I don't think it's some great threat. I don't think it's a huge political problem. I worry about left-wing pessimism, fatalism, that we are losing and don't want to change anything. And I said that the question for me is, how do we win Senate seats in places like Kansas and Missouri and Ohio? I said, I would like to see us doing things like in red states, and here I meant redder than those, running pro-life candidates. People got real upset about that, and I get why. But in 2010, when the Affordable Care Act passed, there were 40 House Democrats who were pro-life at some level. You had to do this whole negotiation with this guy, Bart Stupak.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And on the bright side, you don't have to have those negotiations now. And on the downside, you can't pass the Affordable Care Act. And the point is not that issue, right? That one issue, although things like, the example, say, Susan Collins, where she's in theory pro-choice, but she votes for Mitch McConnell and John Thune as leader. Right. Like, that's how you build power on some level, right? If you have those, Joe Manchin, like, I wish he were still a senator from West Virginia, as much as I have deep disagreements with him. I think that
Joe Manchin's position as a Democrat senator from West Virginia only works if the party has the interest of whipping his votes. If he benefits from being a spoiler more than he benefits from working in tandem with the party, then his D next to his name is only there for him to be more valuable as an infiltrator. Okay? This is a major issue. Joe Manchin, as a Republican from West Virginia, would be meaningless. He'd be in a grand sea of other Republicans. He would not get the same looks from think tanks. He would not get the same amount of money from interest groups. He is only valuable as a Democrat, and he knows that. Okay? This is why I always stress the importance of whipping Joe Manchin. Like, not obviously literally for those who are looking to find political violence in any of my rhetoric. I mean, like, whipping votes.
I'm a person, I think you are a person, whether you admit it or not, who is one of the people with a, voice in shaping what our political culture is. And I believe at some level that political strategy is downstream from political culture. I think it means exploring things that are uncomfortable and being pretty disciplined in a way maybe I haven't been, about separating the question of what I believe from what I believe will win power. Because I currently think that the cost of losing power is horrifying and dangerous, and we can't keep doing it. So that's...
There it is. This was what I clocked as his opinion, is that Democrats have to concede on social conservatism and run spoilers like Joe Manchin instead of winning a broad coalition, because as long as the Democrats are in charge, things are not as bad as they would be as opposed to the Republicans in charge. Look no further than what's happening right now. This is the argument that a lot of Democrat dead-enders present as though it's some sort of brilliant analysis that we are unfamiliar with, right? Democrats winning for the sake of Democrats winning alone is a worthwhile goal, no matter how they win. And the most exaggerated counterexample to this would be, okay, what if they just embodied every single policy position of the Republican Party with the exception of like one or two, and they won that way? Would that still be success? Especially when there is a different alternative out there, when there's an alternative vision out there, seemingly that people are responding positively to, democratic socialism, for example. I think a lot of Dems do unironically think that, though, where they just think, like a lot of Dem voters think that as long as there's a D next to it, if they exhibit the same tendencies and the same ideological background of like the average Republican, then it's fine. It's good. It's better to have a Democrat there than a Republican.
Yeah, so can we start with that exactly? Because the immediate thing, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the immediate thing that springs to mind for me in that question is not who you're abandoning, but how do you square the fact that, in fact, reproductive rights has proven to be pretty popular in red states?
Yeah,
and I'm thinking about referendums that have been passed, such that they've had to, change the rules. Like, how do you separate that?
When I sort of said this in Klein.
Like, there are people who didn't vote for Kamala, but give me my reproductive rights.
I think that I was using first pro-life as an illustrative example. Okay. But there are many red districts in this country. And there are states that we do not even think about competing in anymore, right? I'm not talking about Ohio here. I think you have to try things. By the way, not only moderation kind of things.
There is not a single red state where there needs to be a pro-life Democrat running. There's not a single red state where there needs to be an anti-trans Democrat running. The thing that we should be trying is the thing that the Democrats refuse to try, because the Democrats have already tried and failed with militaristic, jingoistic sentiments, with by running, military veterans, being like, we're the real patriots, all this shit. The thing that Democrats haven't tried is unironically left populism, left economic populism. They haven't tried it. And as a matter of fact, they actively stamp it out. Okay. There are examples of liberals who have won and won big due to their lineage and their familial name, like Andy Bashar, whose father was a part of like institutional politics in the state, things of that nature. And he obviously is uncompromising when it comes to social principles, when it comes to social liberalism. But even then, okay, there are a couple examples of the left populism that's actually panned out quite successfully, but not enough. Democrats are clearly shy about that, or they have some kind of resistance to that kind of messaging.
Try going much harder on economic populism, which some people are trying. I think you might need to combine those two strategies, right? Which is sort of the Dan Osborne in Nebraska approach. I think that you...
So he's saying that left populism should be a strategy that's tried as long as you package it with social conservatism.
I think even before the question of what your policies are, and I believe this very deeply, there's a question of whether or not people feel like you respect them and like them, even if they disagree with you. Before I think people will give you power, they don't even ask, do they like you? They ask whether you like them. And I think a lot of the country feels we don't like them. I believe that I know that. I've seen the focus groups. I've seen the survey data. I've talked to the people who work on this. And that's going to require changing that. Is going to require making moves that somehow send a loud enough signal that people begin to think we have changed it at some level. Sherrod Brown should be able to win in Ohio.
Yes.
The reason he cannot win in Ohio is the Democratic Party itself is a millstone around his neck that drags him down. So what do you do about it? I'm not.
That's true. That's true. Wait. Okay, examine that further. Examine that further. What is the millstone? Is it the pro-trans stuff or is it the neoliberalism? Because Sherrod Brown is a winning politician in Ohio because he is an outspoken union man. Okay, and he doesn't go far enough in terms of like his own ideas of where Medicare should go. I think he's like in favor of Medicare expansion. But exactly the qualities that Sherrod Brown has that make him marketable in Ohio is the left populist policies that he advances. That's it. And the thing that actually puts him underwater in a place like Ohio is not the fact that the Democrats are seen as like being too pro-trans or anything. The only reason why people hyper-focus on that shit is because the Democrats themselves are not aligned with Sherrod Brown on being uncompromisingly pro-labor union or even like pushing the boundaries of what is permissible in terms of left economic populism. That's it. And even Sherrod Brown himself, actually, in my opinion, was nowhere near as aggressive on that front. I've said this so many times. I'm not making shit up. I'm not inventing an alternative reality where everybody's like super pro-trans. That's not the case. Most Americans believe in these two things that are utterly conflicting with one another, okay? One, trans people are actually disproportionately targeted and marginalized, and that's bad. This is literally a majority position. Two, trans people are gross and weird. I don't understand them, and they're it freaks me out when I think about them. Okay, those two positions seem directly at odds with one another, and yet that is the majority position in America. Okay, that is the majority position in America. If you look at any polls on trans people, that is literally the majority position. This means that there's room for growth in either direction. Okay. Most people don't think about trans people all that much unless they are made to think about trans people all the time. And that's part of the reason why the Republicans constantly hammer that point on over and over again. Okay? There's a reason why a lot of people who are transphobic will be like, I'm not hateful to trans people by any means. If they obviously could openly be hateful and transphobic, they wouldn't feel the need to say that even when they're being transphobic. Okay? This is something that I stressed over and over again. The same goes for immigrants. Most Americans are, on the one hand, subscribing to the notion that immigrants are actually doing a lot of crimes and shit. Is a failed hysteria that obviously has been successful in terms of gaining prominence in this conversation in the absence of any sort of counter messaging, right? But they also believe in mass amnesty. How the fuck does that work? Americans actually not only believe in mass amnesty over mass deportation, the majority of Americans choose mass amnesty when given the two options of mass amnesty or mass deportation. But if no party is representing that position, because the Democrats certainly are not representing that position, then of course they're going to be like, all right, I'll go with the other thing, because it seems like one side is at least trying to address this issue. Okay?
Here to tell you I got the answer.
Yeah.
What I would feel much better about is if I felt there was like a strategic discipline about finding it.
So I just if you will take this very gentle pushback.
Yeah, please.
I think
you're here for it.
I haven't seen exactly what people are saying, online in terms of this, but I do think like what immediately strikes me is if you take, I know you would just, it's not, the example necessarily that you would hold out, about reproductive rights, but I think the problem with musing about that is abandoning it is a very real possibility for people who don't have the option necessarily to fly to another state or do X, Y, and Z. So I suspect when they hear somebody of your status, even if it's not the example you mean, putting it out in the air, like they feel, and it's not just that you're putting it out in the air, it's putting it out in the air, and actually, I don't necessarily even mean that one. No, like if you're going to say that, I think you really got to.
I'll stand behind
it. You got to put the data behind it. I think that's really, really important.
I will say, and I think this is actually the nub of it, right? Like I'm glad we're sort of here. I am saying the thing it sounds like I'm saying. Mm-hmm. To be very, very clear.
Right.
I think in a place like Nebraska, you should try to run some pro-life Democrats. I wish people, instead of saying that an express...
That's so dumb. No, it's not. It's not a winning position in Nebraska. It's not. Like maybe he would he's just wrong. Okay? He's just wrong on that issue. Like, I don't mean like, oh, I'm biased towards the pro-choice position. Like, I mean like objectively, he's wrong. There is no region in this country where Democrats have to be pro-life. You can even make this argument about being anti-trans, right? But you can't make this argument about pro-life or pro-choice. And even when you're talking about anti-trans, you don't have to make that argument at all. Okay? It is a coward's argument to make because there are far more gains that you can make by presenting a left populist economic message and move people's attention away from trans issues. Okay? That's my argument. You have to give Republicans something to fight for, or something to fight against, rather. That's at the heart of the politics of the reactionary, is like they have to constantly undermine gains that you're making. And in the absence of something to fight against, they just claw back pre-existing civil rights. And we have, unfortunately, post-Reagan, in the period of unprecedented, unfettered neoliberalism, have redesigned American politics to follow the lead of the Republicans. Okay? Nebraska voters will vote for two high-profile referendums. The initiative to right to abortion, establish the right to abortion until fetal viability, lost by 2%. There is no reason to go for a pro-life candidate in a state like that. If that's enough for you to capitulate, you should be running anti-Semites, not even anti-Israel people, but like straight up anti-Semitic candidates. And I don't think Ezra Klein would ever advocate for that. Okay. Do you see what I mean? It's ridiculous. There are certain things that understandably he's never going to advocate for, and I would never advocate for either. That's ridiculous.
Or strategic question in politics was betraying or abandoning the people we wish to protect. I wish what we said was we lost power in a way that allowed Donald Trump to drive the Supreme Court to a 6-3 Republican majority. And that majority overturned Roe v. Wade. Right. It overturned Roe v. Wade and actually abandoned all these people.
Right. See, that's what he's saying. If Democrats still actually had run pro-life candidates, then Republicans would never be able to win and overturn Roe v. Wade. Except they overturned Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court when a Democrat was president. I guess his argument is that Hillary Clinton lost, and therefore the Supreme Court was packed with right-wing Republicans who then ended up overturning Roe v. Wade. But Roe v. Wade was overturned under Brandon.
Actually, them over, right?
Right.
It is part of, I think, when I say that the work of politics has become diminished, it is part of how that happened, that talking about this creates this sort of counter argument. Well, even to discuss it is to abandon. In 2008, as you and I both know.
Elon Musk, Hasan, I can't find any clips of you being such an advocate for not deporting undocumented people back when Biden was president. Is there a reason why / how that sentiment is so much more galvanized now? Do you fear that Trump and JD will reign for the next 11 plus years? Brother, this person already responded to you, but it's important. Okay? Please go to my YouTube and search HasanAbi Biden border or HasanAbi Biden immigration, and you will probably find hundreds, if not 1,000 videos that I have done over the course of the past 4 years of Biden's presidency, where I have actively railed against Biden for not doing the right thing on immigration. And perhaps one of my most famous videos was clocking exactly what is taking place right now, all the way back in the year 2021, in the month of February, when one of the most high-profile anti-immigration incidents took place, when Customs and Border Patrol was whipping Haitian migrants with their reins in Texas. Okay? I said at the time that immigration is a human crisis that is taking place at the southern border. However, the crisis that the Democrats, if the Democrats lean into the reactionary sentiment here, and the crisis is actually about how many people are coming over our porous borders, the Republicans will capture the attention of the broader population and will make this an issue that they win. Okay? An issue that they win on. The Democrats, of course, did not make this a primary problem and kind of back-pocketed it and turned around and got dominated by the anti-immigrant sentiment. Here is a more recent example from August 29th, 2024. The Democrats are once again running the old strategy of triangulating to the center and running scared, talking about picking up Nikki Haley voters, highlighting a Republican cabinet pick, and pushing the right-wing border bill, forgetting what caused their early momentum. The method is clear. They think not being Biden is enough to win back some of the younger, more progressive demos as they spend the rest of the 60-plus days trying to communicate to Trump holdouts instead of running on progressive issues that help all Americans. Are you on board with the Dems pushing for $1.5 trillion for undocumented in the new spending bill? Yes. I think they deserve $17 gorillion. Okay? $17 quintillion, actually. Okay? I think we should give all of your money, take it out of your pocket at gunpoint, and give it to an undocumented Guatemalan boy. That's what I believe. Since you're already fantasizing about things that are not taking place, I might as well just really lean into that fantasy, right? I believe in a world where the Democratic IRS comes to your door with guns, armed and dangerous, and they say, fork over the dollar bills, bitch. And you cry and you say, no, where is this money going to go to? And they say, to a Guatemalan boy. He needs to buy new sneakers. You. And then they spit on you and they take all your money and then they give it directly to the Guatemalan boy next door. Okay? That's what I believe. Idiot. Dude, it's so funny. You can just like manipulate Republicans with just a couple words. You say undocumenteds are going to get the all of the benefits, and trans people are going to get all the benefits, and they'll be like, please rob me blind. Because like what that chatter is talking about is actually the heated debate that's taking place that Democrats will inevitably cave on, which is assurances that Medicare and Medicaid funding will not be cut. This already took place in the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump passed expeditiously. Okay? That's $800 billion. $800 billion of Medicare and Medicaid spending that is going to be cut. Okay? $800 billion. That's not being cut from undocumented migrants, you idiot. That's being cut from people exactly like you. People like your parents. But the Republicans have just lied to you and said, no, that was going to the undocumenteds. And you're like, oh, that's good then. Anyway, Biden admin so far, February 26, 2021. Deportations didn't halt for 100 days. DHS still working with private prisons. Bomb Syria to threaten Iran. New cages just dropped. Might drop $15 minimum wage. Still waiting on $2,000 checks. $1,400 payment. Look at that. Look at that. Word, but you realize that 70% of our budget is entitlement programs and we're $36 trillion in debt. Do you agree we have an overspending problem? Oh my God. Dude, you are not the government, brother. Why is it that we can always find money for endless American militarism all around the globe, but never money for people like yourself and your parents? Why are you sitting in here advocating against your best interest? Notice how you changed the goalpost, by the way. You said they're pushing for $1.5 trillion for undocumenteds in the new spending bill. That literally is not real. I called it out. Then you turned around and said, do we even deserve entitlements? I don't know if you know this, but you're not Elon Musk, okay, who is obviously the number one welfare queen, for the record. But you're not him. You don't have billions. He does. You keep talking about our debt. Meanwhile, every single time Trump has actually come in charge, he has expanded ginormous tax breaks for the wealthiest and the corporations in this country. What do you think that does to the debt? We have no issue expanding the debt in that regard, but all the issue expanding the debt as far as like it helps everyday working class Americans. You are not a billionaire. Why the are you advocating for the wealthy to continue getting tax breaks? What the hell? What if he is? No, he's not. Come on, dude. Maybe the Biden admin will stop using Title 42 COVID protocol to purge immigrants without due process on Ukrainians, and they just completely stop using it in general. That was me being hopeful. It didn't happen. Anyway, let's continue with this video.
Barack Obama ran, as a public opponent of gay marriage.
Right.
He ran opposed to it.
Right.
Republican Supreme Court forced Biden to end Title 42. Oh, also, one thing that I need to explain to you guys is like what we have seen with Donald Trump melting any sort of institutional prowess or any sort of institutional legitimacy could have been done at the behest of the citizens under the Biden administration. It did not happen, and here we are.
A time when not only, I won't speak for you, was I not opposed to it, but most of us did not, most of us did not think he was opposed to it.
Right.
Like at his heart, we did not think he was opposed to it.
Right.
But he was playing politics.
Right.
That playing of politics allowed him to name Supreme Court justices, and that led to the decision that created a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. And I am saying that that kind of playing politics is needed.
I can give you an example from the other side, by the way, too.
Yeah, go for it.
Brother, you know what my position was during the election about Palestine, about Gaza. Kamala Harris was running to be the first Black woman to be president of the United States. You cannot imagine how animated Black folks were. And some of like the base of the Democratic Party, Black women, we're going to, see this thing. She was not taking a position that I thought was particularly moral. I had to talk in front of Black audiences about that. You know what I mean? And I had to do the other thing, which was go before Arab American audiences here, Palestinian American audiences here, and say, look, I'm with you. You can be mad at me. You probably will be mad at me. I get it. But for me, politics is the lesser of two evils. We've been fighting this battle for a long time. We've never had the luxury of electing people that represented the best of us. And this is why I'm voting for her. This is a really, really serious thing. And when you hear these Palestinian Americans, and when you hear these Muslim Americans, and when you hear these Arab Americans upset about this, you can't just yell at them. You have to take them seriously. These were hard, very, very difficult conversations. But when I made those conversations, look, man, I had to be buttoned up about it. I just think you take very, very seriously the need to convince people outside of the tent right now, right? About like we have to convince them to come in. I guess what I want from you is I want you to take as seriously people who are in the tent and who are vulnerable and afraid. And if you have to convince them of something that's extremely, extremely uncomfortable, or tell them that you're taking a position that is extremely uncomfortable, I just think you owe them a little more. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
man.
that's fine. I'll take it. But I want to put this on you for a minute, right?
Sure.
You keep sort of putting it back on me.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat this one more time. I want racists and transphobes to vote for the Democratic Party, okay? I don't want them to vote for the Democratic Party because the Democrats have become racist and transphobic. I want them to vote for the Democratic Party in spite of their racism and their transphobia, because the Democratic Party is pushing the boundaries of what is possible in terms of social welfare, in terms of bringing back autonomy to the workforce, in terms of public housing, in terms of healthcare, universality. Okay? That's what I want. I'll say it. I say it all the time, but I think I need to repeat it over and over again. Okay? That's it. I don't know why liberals make it seem as though they are reinventing the goddamn wheel when they say, oh, you guys just don't want racists to vote for the Democrats. Like, no, I do. I do. I fucking would love for every racist person to vote for the Democratic Party. It would be great. Okay? It'd be great. But not because the Democrats have become racist. That's what's important. And I think that racists and transphobes would vote for the Democratic Party in spite of their racism and transphobia if the Democrats actually said, we're going to give all the racists health care. Okay? We're going to give everybody health care. Everybody means everybody. Okay? Universal health care means universal health care. It means Nazis are going to get health care. Okay? Free college means Nazis are going to get free college and their children are going to get free college. That's what I believe. That's it. And not because not because the Democrats somehow magically were able to convince racists that like they're more racist than the racist party. It's stupid.
I'm open. Go ahead. I won't.
You keep putting it back on me here on the Ta-Nehisi Coates Show. What then should we do? What then should be? You are one of the most influential public intellectuals in the country. I know you don't like to think of politics as a thing you do, but it is a thing you do. What, as bad as you know this can get, and given that you're not a hopeless person or who, doesn't think you should just collapse into fatalism, what do you think should happen now?
I think that really depends on what your role is. I don't have a great overarching theory for what everybody needs to do because I think we all have different positions. I know what my role is. And I do see myself as part of politics, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very, very important way of answering the question. I mean, I'm not going to be the person that yells at you because, you went on a bunch of right-wing podcasts. As I've said many times, in the course of this interview, I see myself as a writer. I see myself as a journalist. I see myself as someone for whom it's very, very important to state the truth plainly and to clarify things as best I can. I'm not a strategist for the party, and I've tried to, as you raised in that Barack Obama.
This is a funny take, but it's true. Racists used to vote for the Democrats because the Democrats were pro-union and they cared about the union more than being racist. Being racist was just a hobby for them back then. Now that they have no jobs, being racist is their new job. I mean, I think there was more to it because I think a lot of the people that used to vote, like there were a lot of people in the South that voted for the union side, but then there was also a lot of people that voted for the racism side because the Democrats in the South were still eating off the gains of the Dixiecrats. Until, like, I would say Barack Obama, because he was black. And I think that kind of really changed the dynamic a little bit for a lot of that was the final nail in the coffin for Dixiecrats because, a black man was the Democratic leader. But you're not wrong. It's just not the whole story, I would say. But I do like the way you framed it. It's pretty funny. They lost. Now that the racists have no jobs, being racist is their new job. It's no longer a hobby. It's their occupation now. It used to be just their hobby.
Obama piece. I tried to respect the difference.
I guess I'm not pushing you to be a political strategist, right? I think that for me, something you see me doing right here, something I think people reacting to me doing is saying, well, the fight is this profound and we're losing the fight. Then the question is to think about how we fight.
Right.
That's something about knowing that this much of the country is, on the wrong side of what my line would have been.
Right.
Knowing that what Kirk was doing, what people like him were doing, was working.
Right.
That imposes a set of questions upon us that need to be answered.
Right.
Civil Rights Act wasn't the final nail. No. The Southern strategy worked, but like there were still Dixiecrats until in the early 90s and shit. There were still institutional names in the South that were prominent Democrats that racists knew to vote for and did continue to vote for. But part of that was still the last bastion of union voters, union votes. But then the other part of it was because there were some racist ass Democrats. Let's be real.
The thing I'm struggling with in this conversation and even in that question is the fact that there are things that you yourself have actually advocated for that had they been done, we would be having a very different conversation.
I think I want it to not be close.
You said what?
I want it to not be close.
You will call this my fatalism, but I am not surprised. I think it's going to be close. I think it'll be close for a very, very long time. I would like for it to be less close too. But
do you think that's within our power or not really?
Listen, I have a friend, and I'm not going to out him. He's a mutual friend of ours who always says, this is the best set of white folks we have ever had in the entire history of Black America. This is the most woke. This is the least racist. This is the most aware group that we have had. You know what I mean? Like for us, and for those of us who ground ourselves in a larger tradition, this is not close. Like this is a remarkable time. In terms of
he's right. It's just that's how dire the situation used to be and still is.
Our freedom, as writers and journalists to speak to people in terms of the amount of people who are empowered and have some amount of privilege and could just look away and are not looking away, it's not a great time politically. You understand what I'm saying? But it's just, it's not the worst either.
No, it's not.
It's not the worst,
All right, then I think always our final question. What are 3 books you'd recommend to the audience?
So the first book is a book called The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer, which is a joint biography of Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, and how incredibly one was head of the State Department, the other was head of the CIA, and how they worked to overthrow multiple countries during Eisenhower's time. It's just an incredible, mind-boggling book, and it's helping me answer some questions about the role of America in the broader world. The second one is an oldie but goodie, which I've reached for before I wrote my piece, is Race and Reunion by David Blight, which I think is just essential because it shows how a country forgets, and forgets in service of a politic that I would say is problematic. The third one is our mutual friend Chris Hayes' book, Sirens Call, which I think, in fact, actually tells us a lot about the conversation that we're having today, and the influence of social media screens and distraction.
Honestly, Coach, man, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Did you watch how Republicans are pushing that Obama causing political violence today? Oh my God, don't even get me started, okay? Recently, Klein suggested it was obvious that they should run anti-abortion Senate candidates in Ohio, Missouri, and Kansas, all states where abortion protections were enshrined via voter referendum. I think it's the perfect example of his worldview. I know, I talked about that already. He has actually retriangulated it to just simply mean Nebraska, where the pro-life ballot measure won by 2% in a 51-49 split. So at least that's the one state where he could back the empirical evidence, where he could just like claim that there is empirical evidence to suggest the opposite. But even then, it's 2%. It's just like so inconsequential. But yes, his initial assessment was 3 red states that actually enshrined abortion as a constitutional protection. Also, he keeps implying he really means it about transphobia. I know. Anyway, it's just bad. It's just bad overall. I would love to talk to Ezra if given the opportunity. That'd be great. Unfortunately, only Ross wants to talk to me. And Ross is already right-wing as shit. Anyway, you say Ezra's like the lib whisperer, but outside this, does he have tangible motion? Guys, you don't understand. Like, these guys are the power players still read the New York Times. You need to understand. Last spring, Dems met with Davis Shore and Ezra Klein and came back only talking about bread and butter issues. And I'm sympathetic to this, but understand people may be numb to the authoritarian Trump stuff. But it's very weird to just never substantially address what Trump is doing. What comes out sounds like an alien. If Trump is a bad actor, why would he protect healthcare? What does he have to do with Trump's increasingly ominous power grab, the evidence of which he announces daily? Post Charlie Kirk killing especially, there's a very clear gathering storm designed to gut any meaningful political opposition, and Dem leaders just don't seem to care about that much. I don't get it. I think it's important in this moment to not only address the bread and butter issues, because fascism does become a bread and butter issue. And Democrats shouldn't just wait for Jimmy Kimmel to go down, for them to launch some sort of opposition against this. But once again, Democrats are always leading. Are never leading, always following. Ezra's your least favorite Dems favorite podcaster, and probably most of your favorite Dems too. Yeah. Because they're targeting the left and Democrats don't give a fuck about us being targeted. Yeah, they're stupid if they think that it's going to only target the left. That's my point. There was a Republican politician that made a list. The list only comprised of Democratic Party politicians. Okay? This is going to be a fight that needs to be fought in every step, in every different ideological tendency. Any kind of liberalism will be stamped out with the same severity as like radical leftist politics. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of Democrats don't understand that. Like, dude, the designation that they put forward literally says anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism is as a marker for violent rhetoric, anti-Americanism, opposing the traditional American values of family and morality. That's just shit that Republicans say about all Democrats. That is straight up just everything that the Republicans claim Democrats believe. Hasan Reaction is one of the best ones in the React channel.